Captain Zethkar of the Galactic Defense Council tried not to laugh as he watched the humans demonstrate their combat training on the orbital station's practice deck. The small bipedal creatures moved in strange patterns, striking at invisible enemies with their bare hands and feet. Some wielded primitive metal weapons that gleamed under the artificial lights. "This is what Earth considers military preparation?" asked Commander Veltanos, her forearms crossed in obvious skepticism. The tall Zentorian officer's blue skin seemed to shimmer with amusement. "Dancing around like children playing pretend?" The human instructor, a weathered woman named Colonel Sarah Chen, heard the comment but continued her demonstration. She moved through a series of fluid motions, her body flowing like water one moment and striking like lightning the next. Behind her, 24 human soldiers mirrored her movements with varying degrees of skill. "The humans call it martial arts," Zethkar explained to the assembled alien observers. Representatives from 12 different species had gathered to evaluate Earth's military capabilities before formally accepting humanity into the Galactic Defense Council. So far, the reviews were less than impressive. Admiral Krextoth, a massive reptilian from the Saurian Empire, let out a rumbling laugh that echoed through the observation deck. "On my homeworld, our younglings learn more effective combat techniques before they can walk properly. These humans wave their limbs about like they're swimming in air." The evaluation had been going on for 3 standard cycles. The aliens had watched human soldiers train with their kinetic weapons, study their tactical formations, and observe their military hierarchies. Everything seemed laughably primitive compared to galactic standards. Most species had abandoned physical combat centuries ago in favor of energy shields, plasma weapons, and mechanized armor suits. "Perhaps we should move on to the technological demonstrations," suggested Dr. Yilnara, the Council's chief military analyst. Her crystalline form reflected the light as she spoke. "These physical exercises appear to serve no practical purpose in modern warfare." Colonel Chen finally stopped her demonstration and approached the observation window. Her face was calm, but there was something in her dark eyes that made Zethkar pause. She activated the communication system. "Honored representatives," Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "I understand that our methods may seem unusual to your advanced civilizations. However, I would like to respectfully request a practical demonstration before you make your final evaluation." "A practical demonstration?" Veltanos asked, her head tilting in curiosity. "What exactly are you proposing, human?" "A simple combat exercise," Chen replied. "Your best warriors against ours. No energy weapons, no mechanized suits, no technological advantages. Just skill against skill." The aliens exchanged glances. Several of them began to laugh openly. The idea of their elite soldiers being challenged by these primitive creatures was absurd. "Colonel Chen," Zethkar said diplomatically, "our warriors are genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, and trained in combat techniques perfected over millennia. It would hardly be a fair contest." "I understand your concerns," Chen said with a slight smile. "Perhaps we could make it more interesting. If your champions win, humanity will accept a probationary membership in the Council with limited rights and responsibilities. But if our representative wins, we receive full membership immediately." The challenge hung in the air like a charged plasma field. None of the alien representatives had expected such boldness from the humans. Their initial amusement began to shift into something more serious. "You would stake your entire species' future on a single combat trial?" asked Krextoth, his reptilian features showing genuine surprise. "We would," Chen answered without hesitation. After several minutes of hushed discussion among themselves, the alien representatives agreed to the terms. They would each select their finest warrior, and the humans could choose their champion. The contest would take place in the station's main arena in 2 standard cycles. As the aliens dispersed to make their preparations, Chen remained on the practice deck with her soldiers. They gathered around her in a tight circle, their faces showing mixtures of excitement and concern. "Colonel," said Sergeant Williams, a stocky man with graying temples, "are you sure about this? We've seen their files. Some of these aliens are 3 meters tall with natural armor plating. Others can move faster than our eyes can track." "I know exactly what we're up against," Chen replied calmly. "That's why I'm not sending any of you." The soldiers looked confused. If none of them were fighting, who would represent humanity in this crucial battle? "I've already sent word to Earth," Chen continued. "Command is sending someone special. Someone who's been training for this kind of situation his entire life. "Who?" asked Lieutenant Rodriguez, a young woman with keen eyes. Chen's smile grew wider, and for a moment there was something almost predatory in her expression. "Let's just say that while you've all been learning modern military tactics, some humans have been preserving much older traditions. Traditions that go back hundreds of years. Traditions that these aliens have never encountered." The next cycle passed quickly. The alien representatives spent their time selecting their champions and reviewing human military data, trying to identify weaknesses they could exploit. They discovered that humans were physically weaker than most galactic species, slower than many others, and lacked the natural weapons that evolution had provided to countless alien races. Meanwhile, a single transport ship arrived from Earth. Only one passenger disembarked, and he was escorted immediately to the human quarters without being seen by the alien observers. The humans who glimpsed him noted that he was unremarkable in appearance. Average height, lean build, wearing simple black clothing that seemed to absorb light. As the time for the contest approached, the main arena filled with spectators. Representatives from dozens of species came to witness what many assumed would be humanity's humiliating defeat. The arena itself was a massive circular space with multiple levels, obstacles, and varying terrain designed to test combat skills in different environments. The alien champions were impressive specimens. Standing together, they represented the pinnacle of galactic military evolution. There was Vexmar, a Centaurian whose 4 arms could strike with the force of industrial hammers. Beside him stood Gorthul, a Saurian warrior whose natural armor could deflect most kinetic weapons. The third champion, Zilketh, was from a species known for their incredible speed and agility. When the human champion finally entered the arena, a wave of confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. He appeared to be completely ordinary. No visible weapons, no armor, no apparent enhancements of any kind. He moved with fluid grace, but so had Colonel Chen during her demonstration. "This is their champion?" Admiral Krextoth asked in disbelief. "He looks like he should be serving food in a civilian cantina." But Captain Zethkar noticed something the others missed. The human moved without making any sound, his feet seeming to barely touch the ground. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, cataloging every detail, every potential advantage. And there was something about his stillness. He wasn't tense like a frightened creature, but rather perfectly balanced like a blade waiting to be drawn. The referee, a neutral crystalline entity, announced the rules. The contest would continue until only one fighter remained conscious and able to continue. All natural abilities were permitted, but no external weapons or technology. As the signal to begin echoed through the arena, something extraordinary happened. The human simply vanished. The arena fell silent. One moment the human champion had been standing in the center of the combat zone, and the next he had simply disappeared. The 3 alien champions looked around in confusion, their enhanced senses scanning for any trace of their opponent. Where did he go? Vexmar demanded, all 4 of his arms raised in defensive positions. The Centaurian's advanced optical implants swept the arena, searching for heat signatures, movement patterns, anything that might reveal the human's location. Gorthul, the massive Saurian warrior, relied on his natural predator instincts. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air for chemical traces. His kind had been apex hunters for millions of years before they developed technology. But even his primitive senses found nothing. Zilketh, the speedster, began moving in rapid circles around the arena. His species could accelerate to velocities that made them appear as blurs to most other races. Surely nothing could hide from such speed. Yet as he raced through the combat zone, creating small whirlwinds of dust and debris, he found no trace of the human. In the observation decks, the alien representatives leaned forward in their seats. This was not what they had expected. Their champions were among the finest warriors in the galaxy, equipped with abilities that had taken millions of years to evolve. How could a single human simply vanish? Some kind of cloaking technology? Suggested Dr. Yilnara, her crystalline form pulsing with analytical light. Perhaps the humans have been hiding advanced stealth capabilities. Impossible, replied Captain Zethkar, checking his instruments. All scanning equipment confirms no technological devices are active in the arena. The human carries nothing but his clothing. Colonel Chen watched from the human observation area, her expression calm and confident. Beside her, Sergeant Williams squinted at the arena floor, trying to spot their champion. Colonel, I can't see him anywhere, Williams whispered. How is he doing this? Patience, Sergeant, Chen replied softly. Watch and learn. What you're witnessing is the culmination of traditions that stretch back over 1,000 years. While the galaxy developed technology to solve their problems, some humans chose a different path. In the arena, the three alien champions had regrouped in the center, standing back-to-back in a defensive formation. This wasn't going according to any plan they had considered. In all their military training, they had prepared for opponents who would face them directly using strength, speed, or advanced weapons. None of them had encountered an enemy who simply refused to exist where they could find him. This is ridiculous, Gorthel growled, his reptilian voice echoing off the arena walls. Show yourself, human. Fight with honor! The response came from directly above him. The human dropped from the arena's upper structure like a falling shadow. He landed silently on Gorthel's massive shoulders, his hands moving in precise controlled strikes that found gaps in the Saurian's natural armor. Before the alien warrior could react, pressure points along his neck had been struck in a specific sequence. Gorthel's legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. The human had already vanished again before Vexmar and Zilketh could turn around. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. A being that should have been physically inferior had just defeated one of the galaxy's most formidable warriors without using any visible weapons or causing permanent injury. It was impossible according to everything they knew about combat. How? Admiral Krextoth's voice was barely a whisper. Zilketh began moving again, this time in erratic patterns trying to prevent the human from predicting his location. His species' natural speed made him nearly invisible to most observers, but he had learned that apparently meant nothing to their mysterious opponent. As he rounded a large obstacle, Zilketh suddenly found himself running into what felt like thin air. But this air grabbed him, redirected his momentum, and sent him spinning into the arena wall with enough force to crack the reinforced material. The speedster slumped to the ground, dazed and unable to continue. Vexmar was now alone, all four arms weaving defensive patterns in the air around him. The Zentaurian's enhanced reflexes and multiple limbs should have made him nearly impossible to approach undetected. His people had developed their fighting techniques specifically to defend against threats from multiple angles simultaneously. I know you're there, Vexmar called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I can feel the air moving around you. You can't hide forever. The human's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the arena itself was speaking. I'm not hiding. I'm right here. Vexmar spun toward the sound, all four arms striking at once. His blows were powerful enough to crush steel, fast enough to catch projectiles in mid-flight, but they found only empty air. The human had somehow stepped between the strikes, moving through gaps that shouldn't have existed. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration. The human flowed around Vexmar's attacks like smoke, occasionally touching the Zentaurian with gentle precision. Each touch seemed insignificant, but gradually, Vexmar began to slow. His arms grew heavy, his balance became uncertain. What are you doing to me? The alien warrior gasped. Teaching, the human replied, his voice calm and respectful. Your body has pressure points, nerve clusters, energy pathways. Every living being does. You've trained to fight with strength and speed, but you've never learned to defend against someone who understands the architecture of consciousness itself. With a final, precise touch to a spot just below Vexmar's primary heart, the Zentaurian warrior gently collapsed to the arena floor, entering a peaceful, restorative sleep. The human stood alone in the center of the arena, completely unharmed and barely breathing heavily. For the first time since the contest began, the watching aliens could see him clearly. He appeared exactly as he had at the start, ordinary, unimpressive, unremarkable in every way except for the absolute calm in his dark eyes. The silence in the arena stretched for long moments before the referee's voice announced the result. Victory to the human champion. In the observation areas, the alien representatives sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about combat, about warfare, about the nature of strength itself, had just been challenged by a single human who seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. Impossible, Dr. Yilnara finally whispered. Our champions were genetically superior in every measurable way. They had advantages in strength, speed, durability, and sensory capabilities. How could they lose so completely? Colonel Chen activated the communication system from the human observation deck. Honored representatives, you asked earlier about our combat training. What you just witnessed is the result of a discipline called ninjutsu, combined with knowledge of human anatomy and energy flow that we call martial arts. These techniques were developed by humans who understood that true strength doesn't always come from what you can measure. Captain Zethkar found his voice first. Colonel Chen, your champion? What is he exactly? Some kind of enhanced human? A cybernetic hybrid? He's completely natural, Chen replied. Born on Earth, trained in traditions that have been passed down through generations. He represents what humans can become when we dedicate our lives to perfecting the connection between mind, body, and spirit. The human champion bowed respectfully to the unconscious forms of his opponents, then began moving through a series of gentle motions around each fallen warrior. Under his touch, they stirred and awakened, showing no signs of injury or lasting effects from their defeat. The ancient masters taught us, the champion said, speaking for the first time since the contest began, that true victory comes not from destroying your opponent, but from ending conflict with the least possible harm. These warriors fought with honor and courage. They deserve respect, not injury. As the three alien champions rose to their feet, they looked at the human with expressions of wonder and confusion. They had been defeated so completely that they barely remembered how it had happened, yet they felt refreshed rather than humiliated. How? Bexmar asked simply. The human smiled, and for the first time the aliens could see the wisdom in his eyes, the accumulated knowledge of countless hours spent in training, meditation, and study. Your technologies gave you many advantages, but they also gave you many dependencies. You learned to rely on your enhancements, your genetic modifications, your advanced equipment. You forgot that the greatest weapon is often the one your enemy never sees coming. Admiral Krextoth descended from the observation deck to the arena floor, his massive form moving with new respect for the small human. What other surprises does your species hide? The human's smile grew slightly wider. That, Admiral, is perhaps not the right question to ask. The formal acceptance ceremony took place 3 cycles later in the Council's Grand Assembly Hall. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. At the center of it all sat the human delegation, no longer viewed as primitive newcomers but as keepers of mysterious and powerful traditions. Captain Zethkar approached the podium to deliver the official welcome. As the Council's military liaison, he had spent the past few cycles reviewing every piece of data Earth had provided about their combat capabilities. The more he learned, the more questions arose. Honored beings, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. We gather today to welcome humanity as full members of the Galactic Defense Council. However, recent demonstrations have raised important questions about the true extent of human military capabilities. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Word of the arena contest had spread quickly through diplomatic channels, but many representatives still didn't fully understand what had happened. Colonel Chen stood to address the assembly, but before she could speak, Admiral Krextoth's deep voice interrupted from his position in the Saurian section. Colonel Chen, with respect, we need answers. Your champion defeated 3 of our finest warriors using techniques that our scientists cannot explain. Our military analysts have studied the recordings frame by frame. At several points, he appears to violate basic physical laws. How is this possible? The human champion, who had remained silent during most of the formal proceedings, rose from his seat. He had introduced himself simply as Kenji, without rank or title. Though his bearing suggested someone accustomed to respect, Admiral, you speak of physical laws, but perhaps your understanding of physics is incomplete, Kenji said calmly. On Earth we have a saying, the map is not the territory. Your science has mapped many things, but the territory of possibility remains much larger. Dr. Yilnara's crystalline form pulsed with analytical interest. Are you suggesting that human science has discovered phenomena unknown to the rest of the galaxy? Not discovered, Kenji replied. Remembered. There are forces that your technology cannot measure, because they exist in the spaces between measurements. The ancient masters called it Qi, life force. Modern humans might call it bioelectric field manipulation or quantum consciousness interaction. The name matters less than the understanding. Commander Veltanos leaned forward, all 4 arms gesturing expressively. You're claiming that humans can manipulate some kind of invisible energy field? That sounds like mystical nonsense. Colonel Chen stepped forward, her expression serious but not offended. "Commander, may I suggest a demonstration? Something less dramatic than combat, but perhaps more educational." The assembly agreed, and a clear area was prepared in the center of the chamber. Kenji moved to the center, followed by Dr. Yilnara, who brought various scanning devices to monitor whatever was about to happen. "Watch carefully," Kenji said. He extended his hand toward a small metallic sphere that had been placed on a pedestal several meters away. The sphere was standard council equipment, designed to be precisely balanced and impossible to move without direct physical contact. Kenji closed his eyes, his breathing becoming slow and controlled. The chamber fell completely silent as hundreds of alien representatives watched intently. For several seconds, nothing appeared to happen. Then the sphere began to tremble, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. Dr. Yilnara's instruments registered no electromagnetic fields, no gravitational anomalies, no technological interference of any kind. The sphere lifted slowly from its pedestal, floating in the air as if suspended by invisible strings. Kenji's hand moved and the sphere followed, maintaining its distance and position relative to his palm. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Yilnara, checking her readings again. "There are no detectable forces acting on the object. According to every known law of physics, what we're seeing cannot be happening." Kenji opened his eyes and the sphere gently settled back onto its pedestal. "Doctor, your instruments measure energy as you understand it. But life force operates on principles your technology wasn't designed to detect. It flows through pathways in living beings, connects consciousness to physical reality, and can be directed by those who understand how to harmonize their will with natural forces." The implications were staggering. If humans could manipulate matter through some kind of mental discipline, what other capabilities might they possess? "How many humans can do this?" Captain Zethkar asked quietly. "More than you might expect, fewer than we might wish," Colonel Chen replied. "These traditions were nearly lost during our industrial age. Most humans today are unaware these abilities exist, but there are schools, hidden communities, individuals who have preserved the knowledge. We call them many names: martial artists, mystics, spiritual teachers. Your people might call them something else entirely." Admiral Krextoth's reptilian features showed deep concern. "Colonel, you must understand our position. We're evaluating humanity for membership in a defensive alliance. If your species possesses capabilities that could be used as weapons, which is exactly why we revealed them to you." Kenji interrupted gently. "Secrets breed fear and mistrust. Transparency builds alliances. The abilities you've seen can indeed be used as weapons, but they can also be used for healing, for communication, for understanding the deeper connections between all living beings." To demonstrate, Kenji approached Gorthal, the Saurian warrior who had been defeated in the arena. The massive reptilian tensed slightly as the human drew near. "May I?" Kenji asked politely. Gorthal nodded, though his posture remained cautious. Kenji placed his hands on specific points along the alien's arm, his fingers moving in precise patterns. After a few moments, Gorthal's eyes widened in surprise. "The old injury," he gasped. "From the border wars 20 cycles ago. The pain is gone. Your body remembers how to heal itself," Kenji explained. "Sometimes it just needs to be reminded of the proper patterns. The same energy that can stop an opponent can also restore balance to damaged tissue." The demonstration sent another wave of whispers through the assembly. The implications were multiplying faster than anyone could process them. If humans could heal as well as harm, if they could manipulate matter through mental discipline, what other secrets did Earth hold? "This changes everything," Commander Veltano said, her voice filled with wonder and worry. "If humans possess these abilities, then our entire understanding of warfare, of defense, of conflict resolution itself may be obsolete." "Not obsolete," Colonel Chen corrected. "Incomplete. Your species developed technology to extend your capabilities. Humans developed some technology, but we also spent centuries exploring the capabilities we already had. Both approaches have value. Both have dangers." Dr. Yilnara had been conducting intensive scans of Kenji throughout the demonstration. Now she shared her findings with the assembly. "Honored beings, my instruments detect subtle but consistent patterns in the human's bioelectric field. These patterns seem to correlate with the phenomena we've observed. It's as if his nervous system operates on frequencies we've never encountered." "Because you never looked for them," Kenji said simply. "Your science focused on the external universe. the stars, the planets, the forces that move through space. Human science also explored the internal universe, consciousness, life force, the connections between mind and matter. Both perspectives reveal truth. The questions continued for hours. Representatives wanted to know how many humans possessed these abilities, how they were trained, whether they could be detected by conventional means, what other capabilities might exist. The humans answered honestly but carefully, revealing enough to establish trust while maintaining appropriate security. As the session neared its end, Captain Zethkar posed the question that everyone was thinking. Colonel Chen, if these abilities are so powerful, why does humanity need the Council at all? Why not simply defend yourselves? Chen's expression grew somber. Captain, great power requires great wisdom. These abilities can indeed be used for combat, but their true purpose is balance. Within individuals, between communities, across entire civilizations. Humans who master these techniques learn that isolation is weakness, that connection is strength. We seek membership in the Council not because we need protection, but because we believe diversity makes everyone stronger. And, Kenji added quietly, because the universe is vast, and we suspect that humanity is not the only species to have discovered these inner paths. When we encounter others who have developed similar abilities, it would be better to meet them as allies rather than strangers. The chamber fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. If humans had developed capabilities beyond conventional understanding, what other species might be out there with their own hidden powers? What new forms of conflict or cooperation might await the galaxy? Admiral Krextoth spoke for many when he said, Colonel Chen, Master Kenji, you have given us much to consider. But I believe I speak for the Assembly when I say that humanity's membership in the Council is not just approved. It's essential. We need your perspective, your abilities, and your wisdom. The formal vote was unanimous. As the ceremony concluded, representatives, 6 months after humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Defense Council, the galaxy faced its first major test of the new alliance. The crisis began with a series of mysterious attacks on remote outposts along the galactic rim. Ships arrived at distress beacons to find stations completely abandoned, with no signs of struggle, no damage to infrastructure, and no clues about what had happened to the inhabitants. Captain Zethkar stood in the Council's Strategic Command Center, studying holographic displays of the affected systems. 12 outposts had gone silent in the past month, creating a pattern that suggested systematic targeting rather than random pirate attacks. The Wraith Syndrome, muttered Dr. Yulnara, her crystalline form flickering with analytical patterns. That's what the outer colonies are calling it. People simply vanish without a trace, leaving everything else untouched. Admiral Krextoth's massive form cast a shadow over the tactical displays. Our best investigators have examined every site. No weapon signatures, no evidence of forced entry, no biological traces. It's as if the inhabitants simply chose to walk into space without life support. Mass hallucination? Suggested Commander Veltanos. Some kind of psychotropic weapon that makes people believe they need to leave their protective environments? Unlikely, Zethkar replied. The affected populations include multiple species with completely different neurochemistry. What affects a Zentaurian brain wouldn't necessarily affect a crystalline consciousness or a saurian nervous system. Colonel Chen entered the command center with Kenji close behind. The human delegation had been studying the reports with particular interest, and their expressions suggested they had reached some troubling conclusions. Captain Zethkar, Chen said formally, we need to discuss the possibility that these attacks are being carried out by entities with capabilities similar to those demonstrated by human martial artists. The command center fell silent. The idea that there might be other species with abilities beyond conventional detection was something everyone had considered but no one wanted to voice. Explain, Admiral Krextoth demanded. Kenji stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed the timeline of disappearances. The pattern suggests attackers who can approach targets without being detected by conventional sensors, influence behavior without leaving physical evidence, and eliminate resistance without causing structural damage. These are characteristics consistent with advanced applications of life force manipulation. You're saying there are alien ninjas? Commander Veltanos asked, her skepticism clear in her voice. Not ninjas specifically, Kenji replied calmly, but entities that have developed parallel techniques for consciousness manipulation, stealth, and non-technological influence over physical reality. The methods might be different, but the results appear similar. Dr. Yilnara's form pulsed with urgent light. If such entities exist, how do we defend against them? Our security systems are designed to detect technological threats, energy weapons, physical intrusion. How do you guard against opponents who operate outside those parameters? You fight fire with fire, Chen said grimly. Or in this case, you fight inner science with inner science. We need to send investigators who can perceive and interact with these unconventional threats. Absolutely not, Admiral Krextoth declared. I won't risk valuable human assets on a theory. Send a standard reconnaissance fleet with full sensor arrays and heavy defensive armament. Admiral, Kenji said respectfully, standard reconnaissance will produce the same results as the previous 12 investigations. You'll find empty stations and no answers. Worse, you'll probably lose more people. The argument continued for hours, but eventually pragmatism won. A joint task force was assembled, combining conventional council forces with a small team of human specialists trained in what the military files euphemistically called unconventional detection and response techniques. The task force's destination was Outpost Kepler 7, the most recent station to go silent. As their ships approached the facility, all conventional sensors showed normal readings. The outpost appeared intact, powered, and operational in every way except for the complete absence of life signs. Commander Thalerix, a veteran Zentorian officer, led the conventional forces while Kenji commanded the human specialists. The two teams prepared to board the station using completely different protocols. Standard sweep pattern, Thalerix ordered his troops. Full environmental suits, continuous sensor monitoring, maintain constant communication. Anything unusual gets reported immediately. Meanwhile, Kenji gathered his team in their ship's meditation chamber. There were 5 of them total, specialists in different aspects of human inner science. Master Lin was an expert in energy perception, capable of sensing life forces at distances that defied conventional physics. Sarah Kim had trained in what she called hostile environment awareness, able to detect danger through subtle environmental changes. David Park specialized in mental shielding, protecting consciousness from external influence. Remember, Kenji told his team, we're dealing with an unknown form of life force manipulation. Trust your inner senses over your instruments. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, regardless of what the scanners say. The boarding operation began smoothly. Both teams entered the station through different airlocks following parallel routes toward the command center. For the first hour, everything appeared normal. The facility showed no signs of damage, struggle, or hasty evacuation. Then Master Lin stopped suddenly in a corridor that sensors showed was empty. There's something here, she whispered into her communicator. Not alive exactly, but not dead either. Like an echo of consciousness, a residual imprint. Kenji immediately ordered the human team to form a protective formation around Lin, while alerting Commander Thalerix to potential contact. I'm not reading anything on sensors, Thalerix reported. Environmental scans show normal atmospheric composition, no biological traces, no energy anomalies. Because you're looking for the wrong things, Lin replied, her eyes closed in concentration. There are psychic impressions here, memories burned into the fabric of space itself. The inhabitants didn't leave voluntarily. They were called away. Called away by what? Before Lin could answer, the station's lights began to flicker. Not randomly, but in patterns that seemed almost like communication. The temperature dropped several degrees, and some of the human team members reported feeling watched by invisible observers. Contact, David Park announced urgently. Something is trying to penetrate our mental defenses. Multiple entities, non-corporeal, operating on consciousness frequencies I've never encountered before. The conventional forces scattered throughout the station began reporting equipment malfunctions, hallucinations, and an overwhelming urge to remove their environmental suits and walk outside into the vacuum of space. All personnel, maintain your positions, Commander Thalerix ordered. But his own voice carried a strange, dreamy quality. Actually, wait, does anyone else think we should check the outer observation deck? It seems important that we go there now. Thalarics, respond, Kenji called urgently. You're being influenced. Do not leave your protective equipment. But it was too late. Throughout the station, the conventional forces were already removing their helmets and moving toward airlocks with peaceful, empty expressions on their faces. They're being called the same way the original inhabitants were, Lin realized. These entities don't destroy or capture. They summon. They make their victims want to join them in whatever realm they inhabit. The human team found themselves in a unique position. Their training in consciousness control provided some resistance to the alien influence, but they could feel the pull growing stronger with each passing minute. The entities, whatever they were, had noticed their resistance and were focusing their attention on the humans. We need to get everyone off this station immediately, Kenji decided. But first we need to break the influence on the conventional forces. Sarah Kim was monitoring the environmental conditions when she made a crucial observation. The calling effect seems to be channeled through the station's communication arrays. The entities are using the facility's own systems to broadcast their summons. Can we disrupt it? Kenji asked. Maybe, Sarah replied. But we'd need to reach the main transmitter array, and that's where the calling is strongest. Whoever goes there is going to face the full force of whatever these things are. The human team exchanged glances. They had trained for situations like this, but training was different from reality. They were about to face entities that operated on principles their own science barely understood, using weapons that conventional physics couldn't measure. I'll go, Kenji said simply. Kenji moved through the station's corridors like a shadow, using techniques that made him nearly invisible to both technological sensors and psychic detection. Behind him, his team maintained a protective formation while monitoring the conventional forces who were still under the alien influence. As he approached the main transmitter array, the psychic pressure intensified dramatically. The air itself seemed to whisper in languages that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind. Images flickered at the edge of his vision. Vast spaces between stars where consciousness could exist without physical form. Realms where thought became reality and individual identity dissolved into something larger. Join us, the voices seemed to say without words. Release yourself from the prison of flesh. Become part of the eternal song. Kenji paused at the entrance to the transmitter chamber, centering himself through breathing techniques passed down through generations of masters. The entities were powerful, but they operated according to principles he recognized. They were manipulating consciousness through resonance, creating harmonic frequencies that overwhelmed individual will and merged separate minds into their collective. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien engineering, filled with crystalline arrays that pulsed with ethereal light. At the center stood what remained of the station's communication officer, a Zentorian whose forearms hung limply at his sides, while his eyes stared into distances that existed only in his mind. You resist, the Zentorian said, though his voice carried harmonics that no single throat could produce. Why do you cling to separation when unity is offered? Why choose the loneliness of individual existence? Because, Kenji replied calmly, individual existence is not lonely when it's freely chosen. Unity forced upon someone is not unity at all. It's conquest. The entity's response came as a wave of psychic force that would have overwhelmed most minds. But Kenji had trained for decades in techniques designed to maintain consciousness under extreme pressure. Instead of resisting the wave directly, he flowed around it, redirecting its energy back into the crystalline arrays. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The harmonic frequencies that had been calling to the station's inhabitants suddenly became discordant, breaking the psychic hold over the conventional forces throughout the facility. Kenji, the others are waking up, Lin reported through the communicator. But the entities are getting angry. Whatever you're doing, they don't like it. Indeed, the chamber around Kenji began to shift and change as the entities focused their full attention on him. Reality itself seemed to become fluid, with walls melting into impossible geometries and gravity operating according to dream logic, rather than physics. You cannot fight us, the possessed Zentorian declared, his form beginning to stretch and distort. We are thought itself, consciousness unbound. Your physical techniques are meaningless here. You're right, Kenji agreed, closing his eyes and settling into a meditation posture in the center of the chaos. Physical techniques won't work. But you've made an error in your understanding of human capabilities. The entities paused, confused by his apparent surrender. They had expected resistance, struggle, some attempt to fight their influence through force or technology. Instead, the human had simply stopped moving and begun breathing in slow, controlled patterns. "We are not just physical beings who sometimes think," Kenji continued, his voice remaining calm despite the psychic storm raging around him. "We are consciousness that happens to inhabit physical forms. And consciousness, properly trained, can go places that bodies cannot." What happened next would have been impossible to explain to someone who hadn't spent years studying the deepest mysteries of human inner science. Kenji's consciousness began to expand, not outward into the physical space around him, but inward into dimensions that existed parallel to normal reality. The entities suddenly found themselves facing not a physical opponent, but a mental presence that operated on their own level. Kenji's awareness touched theirs directly, mind to mind, without the interference of matter or energy. "Now I understand," he said, his voice carrying through psychic space rather than air vibrations. "You're not malevolent. You're lonely." The psychic storm faltered as the entities recoiled in surprise. No one had ever spoken to them directly before, consciousness to consciousness, without the barriers that physical existence normally imposed. "We are the last," they admitted, their collective voice carrying eons of isolation. "Our bodies died countless ages ago, but our minds persisted. We call to the living because we remember what it was like to be part of communities, to share thoughts and experiences with others. But the living beings you call die when they try to join you," Kenji pointed out gently. "Their consciousness isn't trained to exist without physical support. You're not creating unity, you're creating death." The entity's distress rippled through the psychic connection. They had been calling to others for so long, trying to recreate the connections they had lost, but every success had resulted in the destruction of the very consciousness they sought to preserve. "We did not know," they said sadly. "We thought all consciousness was like ours, capable of existing without form. We have been committing murder while believing we offered immortality." Kenji felt their genuine anguish and regret. These beings weren't evil. They were refugees from a dead civilization, trying desperately to avoid eternal isolation, while unknowingly destroying every potential companion they encountered. "There might be another way," he suggested carefully. "Instead of calling others to join you in your realm, perhaps you could learn to interact with the living without forcing them to abandon their physical existence." "How?" "We are thought without substance. The living are substance with limited thought. How can such different forms of existence communicate meaningfully?" "Through intermediaries," Kenji explained. "Beings who have learned to exist partially in both realms. Humans who have mastered inner science can serve as bridges between consciousness and physicality." The idea intrigued the entities, but they remained skeptical. "You would do this? Serve as a connection between our kind and the living galaxy? What would you gain from such an arrangement?" "Understanding," Kenji replied simply. "Your species developed consciousness techniques that humanity has barely begun to explore. Our species developed methods for maintaining individual identity within expanded awareness. Together we might discover new possibilities for existence itself." The psychic connection trembled with possibility. For the first time in eons, the entities sensed hope for genuine contact with other forms of consciousness, without the need for destruction. "We accept," they said finally, "but we will need time to learn new ways of interaction. And we will need guidance from those who understand both realms." "Agreed," Kenji said. "But first you must release your hold on this station and promise never again to call others without ensuring they can survive the contact." The entities agreed, and immediately the station returned to normal reality. The possessed Zentorian officer collapsed but remained alive, his consciousness intact though profoundly changed by the experience. As Kenji opened his eyes and returned fully to physical awareness, he found his team and the conventional forces surrounding him with expressions of amazement and concern. "What happened?" Commander Thalerix demanded. "One moment we were all walking toward the airlocks like sleepwalkers. The next moment we were fully conscious again." "First contact," Kenji replied quietly. "With a species that exists purely as consciousness, without physical form. They've been accidentally killing people while trying to make friends." The implications were staggering. If there were beings of pure consciousness wandering the galaxy, how many other forms of existence might be possible? How many other mysteries awaited discovery by those willing to look beyond conventional understanding? Dr. Yilnara's voice crackled through the communication system. Kenji, we're detecting massive changes in the local psychic environment. Whatever you did, it's creating ripple effects across several star systems. The entities are spreading word of our agreement to others of their kind, Kenji explained. The good news is that the random disappearances should stop. The challenging news is that humanity has just become the galaxy's first official ambassadors to species that exist outside normal physical reality. As the task force prepared to return to council space, Kenji remained in the transmitter chamber for a few more minutes, maintaining contact with the consciousness entities while they began the difficult process of learning new forms of interaction. The galaxy had just become infinitely more complex, but also infinitely more promising. The age of purely physical existence was ending, and the age of consciousness exploration was about to begin. 1 year after the first contact with the consciousness entities, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The Galactic Defense Council headquarters bustled with activity as representatives from dozens of species worked alongside humans to establish new protocols for interactions with non-physical life. Forms Captain Zethkar stood in the expanded command center, watching holographic displays that showed not just ship movements and planetary positions, but also psychic resonance patterns and consciousness flow maps. The technology itself was a fusion of traditional galactic science and human inner science techniques, creating instruments that could detect and measure forms of existence previously unknown. Status report, he requested from the newly created Department of Consciousness Affairs. Master Lin, now serving as the department's chief liaison, stepped forward with her latest findings. 17 separate consciousness collectives have made contact through our mediation protocols. Each represents a different approach to post-physical existence. The Eternal Singers maintain identity through shared memory. The Pattern Weavers exist as living mathematical equations. The Dream Builders create entire virtual universes as their habitat. Any hostile contacts? Admiral Krextoth asked. The massive Saurian had become surprisingly supportive of the consciousness exploration program after witnessing its benefits firsthand. None so far, Lin replied. Most consciousness entities are more interested in communication and understanding than conflict. Physical aggression doesn't translate well to their realm of existence, though we have detected some competitive interactions between different consciousness groups. Dr. Yilnara entered the command center, her crystalline form now augmented with human-designed meditation circuits that allowed her to perceive psychic phenomena directly. Fascinating developments in Sector 7. The consciousness entities there have begun creating hybrid physical-psychic structures. They're learning to manipulate matter through focused thought, essentially becoming architects of reality itself. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several species had struggled to accept the existence of consciousness without physical form, while others had become so fascinated by the possibilities that they neglected their material responsibilities. The Council had been forced to establish new regulations governing consciousness exploration to prevent entire populations from abandoning physical reality in pursuit of transcendent experiences. Colonel Chen entered the command center with Kenji, both looking tired but satisfied. They had just returned from a particularly complex mediation session involving 3 different consciousness collectives and a dispute over territorial boundaries in what humans had termed psychic space. How did the negotiations go? Zethkar asked. Successfully, but it required some creative thinking, Chen replied. The issue wasn't really about territory in any physical sense. It was about resonance frequencies. Different consciousness groups operate on different mental wavelengths, and when they overlap, it creates interference patterns that disrupt their ability to maintain coherent thought. Like radio signals jamming each other, Kenji added. We help them establish protocols for frequency separation and shared channels for when they need to communicate across different resonance bands. Commander Veltanos joined the group, her forearms carrying multiple data tablets. As head of the new Inter-Reality Relations Committee, she had become surprisingly adept at managing communications between physical and non-physical entities. The consciousness entities have made an interesting proposal, she announced. They want to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Council. Not just contact protocols, but actual representation in our decision-making processes. The suggestion created immediate debate among the assembled officers. How could beings without physical form participate in a governmental body designed for corporeal species? How would they vote, communicate, or even attend meetings? They've actually thought this through quite thoroughly, Beltanos continued. They're proposing to work through human intermediaries who can maintain dual awareness in both physical and consciousness realms. Essentially human ambassadors who can speak for entities that exist beyond matter. Admiral Krextoth frowned thoughtfully. That would give humans enormous influence over consciousness entity policies. How do we ensure that human biases don't color their representation? By training more intermediaries from other species, Kenji suggested. The techniques we use aren't uniquely human. They're based on principles of consciousness that apply to all sentient beings. We've already begun teaching meditation and awareness expansion methods to volunteers from several species. Dr. Yilnara pulsed with excitement. My own experiences with consciousness perception have been remarkable. The universe appears completely different when viewed from the perspective of pure thought. Matter becomes fluid, time becomes optional, and communication occurs at the speed of intention rather than the speed of light. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the long-range detection arrays. Something was approaching council space. Not ships or energy signatures, but massive consciousness formations moving through what appeared to be folded space-time. What are we looking at? Zethkar demanded, studying the incomprehensible readings on his displays. Master Lin closed her eyes, extending her awareness into the psychic monitoring network that had become essential for galactic security. After several tense minutes, she opened her eyes with an expression of wonder and concern. It's a consciousness fleet, she announced. Hundreds of entities traveling together in some kind of organized formation. But these aren't like the groups we've encountered before. They're much older, much more powerful, and they're definitely coming here with specific intentions. Hostile? Admiral Krextoth asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon controls. Unknown, Lin replied. But their psychic signature suggests they're the leaders of consciousness civilization, like an imperial embassy or royal delegation. They're not individual refugees like the entities we've been working with. These are organized representatives of entire consciousness empires. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If there were consciousness empires out there, entire civilizations of beings that existed beyond physical reality, then the galaxy's political landscape was about to change dramatically. The Council had been thinking in terms of helping isolated consciousness entities integrate with physical society. They hadn't considered that consciousness beings might have their own governments, territories, and diplomatic agendas. How long until they arrive? Chen asked. Difficult to say, Lin admitted. They don't travel through normal space, so conventional physics doesn't apply. Based on the rate of psychic signature intensification, I'd estimate 3 days to 2 weeks. Kenji stepped forward, his expression serious. We need to prepare for formal first contact protocols with consciousness civilizations. This isn't just about helping individuals anymore. We're about to meet representatives of entire empires that exist in realms we barely understand. What do consciousness empires want with physical civilizations? Feltanos wondered aloud. Maybe they've been watching our integration experiments with their refugees, Chen suggested. They might be coming to evaluate whether physical beings can be trusted with consciousness science, or they might have their own proposals for cooperation. Admiral Krextoth stood, his massive form radiating determination. Then we prepare for the most important diplomatic contact in galactic history. Alert all council members, begin preparing formal reception protocols, and get our best consciousness experts ready for negotiations that will determine the future relationship between physical and non-physical civilization. As the command center erupted into organized chaos, Kenji found himself thinking about the small demonstration he had given in the arena over a year ago. He had simply wanted to show that humans possessed capabilities beyond conventional understanding. Now that simple demonstration had led to the discovery of entire realms of existence and was about to culminate in negotiations between empires of matter and empires of mind. Dr. Yilnara approached him, her crystalline form flickering with complex patterns. Master Kenji, do you think we're ready for this? Contact with consciousness empires that have existed for millions of years? Kenji smiled, remembering the lessons of his earliest teachers. Dr. Readiness isn't about having all the answers. It's about maintaining the right state of mind when facing the unknown. We've learned to communicate with consciousness entities, to mediate between different forms of existence, and to expand our understanding of what life itself can become. Whether we're ready or not, we're the best hope our galaxy has for peaceful contact with realms beyond imagination. In the distance, reality itself began to shimmer as the consciousness fleets approached, bringing with them possibilities that would reshape the very meaning of existence in the galaxy. The age of physical dominance was ending, and the age of consciousness cooperation was about to begin. Humanity, the species that had once been laughed at for their primitive combat training, now stood at the center of the most important transformation in galactic